This is the Ordinary Business Podcast for business owners who want honest conversations, a lean business, and an extraordinary life on their own terms. Before we dive in, the Ordinary Business Summit is starting today. And if you haven't grabbed your ticket, you still can. Go to theordinarybusiness.com. If you're listening a few days from now and it's after the 15th and you're like, oh, I missed the summit, you can still get the replay pass so you can kind of watch everything on your own time. But since the summit is happening this week, I thought it would be the perfect time to kind of give you a peek behind the scenes of what it's like to juggle planning a summit and a podcast launch and a full client load when you don't really have a team. Now, I did have some help. I'm not completely doing this by myself, but I'm saying, a lot of people might have 3 or 4 people helping them or more. But I am just an ordinary business owner with some time constraints. So I have done summits before many times, both as a host and a participant. So I knew what to expect and what was involved. And so today we're going to kind of talk about different aspects of how it started, some of the logistics, boundaries, things that I did, how I managed it, all that kind of fun stuff. So for context, for those of you who don't know, I just wanted to share how this kind of came to be. I made a post on Threads saying, someday, maybe I will host the Ordinary Conference and speakers will have to make less than a certain amount, have fewer than this many followers, etc. I was completely just being facetious. I was about to go to a conference, was feeling a little annoyed preemptively about knowing there's going to be lots of scaling talk and 7 figures and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I know I'm choosing to go to the event, but I knew what I would probably hear from stage and was already not in the mood to hear it necessarily. So I made this post and people got excited. And I was like, guys, I'm not doing a conference. I don't know how to do a conference. And so I was like, okay, maybe I should test this out with a summit first. Let's do a virtual summit because I've done those before. So I'm thinking about when am I going to do this? And I really wanted to kind of ride this wave of excitement instead of waiting until January. At this point, this is in July when I finally decide I'm going to do a summit. So I look at the calendar and I'm like, okay, October, we'll do it then. So I jump in. We get started right away. Put out a speaker application. I get 91 speaker applications. And I had 12 speaking slots. Do you know how hard it is to narrow down from 91 to 12? And so I debated on different formats because I did not want a huge summit. It's just my personal preference. I don't love when it's a summit and there's 4 days with 20 speakers a day, whatever. And so I was kind of like, okay, are there different formats I could test out? Is there a way to include more people? I really didn't want to reject anybody. I didn't want to tell people no. And part of that is because I have been told no many, 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 many times over the last 14 years. Like when I've applied to be on podcasts, applied to be on summits, whatever, because, I don't have the list size requirement or the social following requirement. Now, I did not even ask people's list size or social media following numbers or anything like that. So that was not part of this. So that wasn't why I was telling people no. It was strictly just there are a lot of applicants and not a lot of spots. And so I have to narrow it down. So eventually I decided I don't need to overcomplicate this for this first iteration. And so I decided we're just going to do the summit and that's it. There's not going to be this private podcast. I'm not going to extend the summit, some of these options I'd considered. And as I'm starting to get into the prep of the summit, a friend of mine asked, "Oh, so like, are you taking on fewer client projects to give yourself time to work on the summit?" And I said, "No, because I'm already booked out like into November, I think at that point." So as I'm like planning for the summit and I pick a timeline, I already had client projects that were scheduled for October. And I just didn't want to delay holding the summit because I wanted to lean into that excitement that people were having. So I just decided, you know what? I can just juggle both. I can juggle summit prep and a full client load. So instead, I adjusted some other things and bent some of my own rules, and that's what I'm going to share. So first, I decided to pause posting on YouTube. I used to have another podcast, and I shifted that to be every other week instead of weekly. And then typically, I do not work on Fridays. Like for the last 9 or 10 years, I have not worked on Fridays, or I would say maybe 4 to 5 Fridays in a calendar year, I might work if I'm like, oh, I was sick and I need to catch up or something, but typically not working. And so those are some of the minor adjustments that I made because I mean, really, that's the only other options I had of things I could tweak in my schedule. Now I do want to acknowledge, if I wouldn't have been booked out with clients like I typically am, sure, I probably could have taken maybe one less client, and I may leave some blank space in my client calendar in the spring before the next Ordinary Business Summit. Wink, wink. But not everyone can afford to do that. We're all ordinary business owners. Some of us have fewer clients or are not making as much, and we really do need like every single client. I would have the privilege of being able to be like, hey, I'm going to block off these 2 or 3 weeks and not take a client during this time and just give myself a lot of summit prep and admin time. So if that's not something you can do, if you ever want to do a summit, it might mean like, hey, if I'm going to do a summit in such and such month, maybe the few months before or during, I lengthen the client timeline. So maybe instead of a client project taking 2 weeks, you tell them it's going to take 4 weeks. Or maybe you just give yourself a longer summit prep runway. I only had about 2.5 months, like maybe right at the 3-month mark, which is fairly short in some regards. So maybe you give yourself 6 months and you start the speaker application process earlier. So there are different options. You don't have to go, you don't have to do my approach. Now, when it comes to boundaries and time spent and that kind of stuff, normally I am very, very strict about I don't work on weekends. I don't work in the evenings. I don't work on Fridays. Again, unless it's extenuating circumstances and I don't know, I need to catch up or something. But during this summit prep time, I bent those boundaries for the short term. So I wanted to give you like the literal what I did. I skipped a few gym days here and there. Typically, I try to go to the gym like 5 days a week. There were some weeks that it was like I might only go 2 or 3 days that week. And that would give me more time in the workday because I typically, after breakfast and my husband and daughter leave, I go to the gym and then come back and work. By not going to the gym, I gave myself another hour of work in my day. So, of course, worked some Fridays, and I did actually work part of a Saturday. I only worked on that one particular Saturday because my husband and daughter went out of town for something. So I had alone time at the house and I was like, you know what? It would be nice if I could work on some of these things for the summit. I wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to work on a Saturday and not get to spend time with my family. They were doing their own thing as they sometimes do on Saturdays. And then I did work quite a few evenings, especially right before this podcast launched, partially because I bumped up my podcast launch by 3 weeks, which is my own doing, and I needed that extra time to get everything done. Now, to be clear, when I say working evenings, I was still in bed by 9 or 9:30. Like, I still needed my sleep, but it was short term, and I knew it was short term. And I really want to make an important distinction that I am not a fan of hustle culture. I'm not a fan of pulling all-nighters. So do not take this episode as me saying like, oh, sometimes you just have to hustle and sometimes you just have to put in the hours. I mean, to a certain extent, like I chose, like I'm going to just have to put in the hours. I don't think that's the right solution for everybody. And I hopefully can have more planning time in the future so I don't have to do this again. But it was a short, intentional season. And for me, the excitement and the passion behind it was worth it. And that's why I chose to do it. Now, I keep talking about summit prep. Obviously, there's also this podcast, which was not part of the original plan. I still had my other podcasts going on. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll do this summit. And then as I'm talking to people, as I'm talking about the summit, eventually I'm like, maybe I need to do a podcast. Now, remember, I kind of mentioned briefly earlier, I had debated on doing like a private podcast as part of the summit, like as kind of like a bonus of the summit. That was too complicated. So then I think my brain was like, okay, well then just do like a public podcast. And so I decided to switch gears. I shut down my other podcast and decided to launch this one. Now, again, doing this to myself, I could have been like, okay, summit in October, maybe let's wait and kind of space things out and do the podcast like in January or something. But I wanted to keep that momentum. I wanted to lean into the excitement that the community had about everything with the ordinary. And so I decided to do both, knowing it would also add to my plate and with a compressed timeline would mean working some evenings to get everything ready. But again, worth it to me might not always be worth it for you. Some people are more strict with their boundaries and their time than I am. And I feel like I'm pretty strict, but some people are not willing to budge. And I am sometimes. So, I also want to talk about like support during this summit prep and the summit itself. So I did have a tiny bit of help. Now, I'm not saying tiny because I'm trying to undermine the people who helped me, but I want to be clear, this was not like a 5-person team. So the first was I hired a friend who does some consulting and has done really successful summits. We had 2 consulting calls. Those both happened in August. She helped me kind of plan out and strategize everything. She didn't help with any hands-on things, but really helped me with like logistics and stuff like that. And then my OBM, Chrissy, shout out to Chrissy, decided, I asked her if she could help me with some of the summit things. So she would help put emails into Kit to send those out. She helped with some of the organization. She's going to help with some of the actual summit happenings while the summit's going on. So not a big team, just one set of extra hands to lighten the load and the consultant who helped with like some of the brains behind the whole operation. So it is possible to do a whole summit without like this huge team. When I've done previous summits, I had zero help. I did not hire a consultant. I did not have any type of VA to help me with uploading things. So it's definitely doable. As we wrap up, I just wanted to kind of reiterate some important things that I want to communicate to you. We don't have giant teams or endless capacity as business owners, and you can bend your own rules. I know that a lot of us like to talk about how we have capacity and we have free time and life fits around work. Like we don't center our whole life around work, but it's okay if you're like, hey, I know I kind of coach or preach or teach boundaries and don't work on weekends, but if something really excites you, it's okay. You can work extra. And also on the flip side of that, it is also okay if you're like, it is exciting, but it's not worth it for me to bend the rules. So for you, you might be like, yeah, that does sound really exciting, but it would not be worth it for me. And the summit would have to wait until January, or the podcast would have to wait until, whatever. So that you get to decide what that looks like in your own business. We all juggle things. We all compromise differently, and you get to decide what's worth it in your season. If this was happening 4 or 5 years from now, that this, new idea came about and last minute and, all these plans, my daughter would be older. Our schedule might be a little bit different. I'm assuming in 4 or 5 years when she's in grade school. And I might not have the capacity to bend those rules. So I have that luxury of having the time and capacity now, and I might not in the future. So that's something to think about. I did also want to, reiterate, I bent some rules, but not all the rules. So again, I didn't pull all-nighters. I didn't miss any family dinners. Didn't really blow through any other personal non-negotiables. I don't treat the gym as a non-negotiable. Like, yes, I'm very, very consistent, but I'm not someone who's like, I absolutely have to go every single day or else. Like, I give myself some space and margin there. So yeah, there's certain trade-offs I made and some that I didn't. And so you get to decide what that looks like for you. And when it comes to momentum and excitement and passion, sometimes there's not a perfect timing. Sometimes it's good enough timing and enough excitement to make it work. And I'll be totally honest, it ended up, this timing is not ideal. So I went, as you're listening to this, I was at a conference. I went out of town this past weekend, which was totally optional. I decided kind of last minute to go. So again, doing this to myself, but wanted to go to a conference to see some clients. Luckily, it was a drivable distance, so it was pretty easy. And then I came home, it'll be yesterday, have the summit. The extra summit things wrap up on Thursday. I leave Friday for a high school fall retreat. So it's a busy, 2 weeks. I could have chosen another week, but it all worked out. It'll be fine. So do I recommend you always bend your boundaries? No. But for me, again, this community, this mission is so important to me that I was willing to bend the rules and make it work. So I hope this sneak peek was helpful for you, especially if in case you've ever thought about doing a summit or some kind of virtual online event before. I know I didn't really get into the tech part or how I decided on the specific, tech or logistics or speakers or anything like that. If you're interested in me doing an episode on that, like a debrief of the summit, feel free to DM me and let me know. And if there's enough interest, I can do that. I'm happy to share that behind the scenes peek as well. But otherwise, I hope you will go check out the summit if you aren't already in there. And I will see y'all next week.